Meeting for the CVR Safe Committee. He won't be voting, but if you turn the time over to me when we adjourn this committee and reconvene as the Safe Committee, I can make that note for the record that he is present.
Director Haudashelt, could you please turn on your microphone? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that reminder. We'll start with a roll call.
Thank you. Good morning. Director Boomgarden,
Here.
Branscombe, Rollins for Branscombe.
Here.
Chapman.
Here.
Clarici, absent, Early absent, Jennings.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Sander. Vice Chair Desmond, absent. Vice Chair Haudashelt.
Here.
And Chair Lauren absent, alternate Vaisio.
Here.
Thank you. And ex officio member Tacker for Aceves.
Here.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, everybody. We'll start with public communications. Any person wishing to address the committee on an item that's not on the agenda may do this so at this time. After 10 minutes of testimony, and additional testimony will be heard following the action items. Is there anyone here that would like to comment on something that's not on the agenda?
There's no general public communications.
Thank you very much. Next, I need to read the disclosure. Directors will disclose any item in which they have a conflict of interest under state law and acknowledge whether they will recuse from that item. Amongst the other state laws, the Levine Act may require recusal on items involving a contract or entitlement or a campaign donor as a participant. Anyone have a disclosure? All right. Our next item is the consent, and it's the approval of the minutes of the December 5th, 2024 committee meeting. Do we have any comment on this? Do we have any public comment on this?
There's no public comment.
All right, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Chair Jennings, second by Director Chapman. Chair Jennings, Director Jennings and Director Chapman. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Those abstentions. All right, we'll now adjourn as the SACOG Transportation Committee and convene the Capital Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways Committee, and that's a separate agenda. All right. And on that agenda, Lynette, will you call the roll on that one?
Thank you, Director Haudashelt. We'll note for the record that Director Jennings is here, as well as Supervisor Ruckman. One of the CVR Safe board members is present online. He will not be voting this morning, but he is present, so we'll note that for the record.
Okay. You want me to read the disclosure statement again? I'm going to look to our attorney. Read it for this meeting as well? Fantastic. Directors will disclose any item in which they have a conflict of interest under state law and acknowledge whether they will recuse from that item. Among other state laws, the Levine Act may require recusal of items involving a contract or entitlement or a campaign donor as a participant. Do we have any recusals? Conflicts, okay. Our first item under the CVR Safe Committee is the consent item, the approval of the minutes of December 5th, 2024. The comments on that, any public comment on that?
There's no public comment on the minutes.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve them.
Second.
All right, approved by, moved by Director Sanders, second by Director Desmond. All those in favor say aye. And those opposed, abstain? Okay. The next up is the information item, potential call box removals in the CVR safe fiscal, CVR fiscal stability item. And is Barbara,
Right here.
there you are. Good morning, Barbara.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Barbara Von Bechtold. I'm the program manager for the Capital Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways, or CVR SAFE for short. CVR SAFE is made up of El Dorado, Sacramento, San Joaquin, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. The revenues for the CVR SAFE are collected through a $1 fee assessed to the time of vehicle registration in the participating counties. So we're bringing you an item today because with the recent cost increases in the CVR SAFE call box maintenance, we'd like to bring forward for the board to consider regarding potential call box removal starting next fiscal year in 2025-26 to address the fiscal sustainability of the CVR SAFE program. The information in the item before you discusses the potential for the removal of call boxes, both roadside and trailside, because we have a number along the trails on the river, to reduce or eliminate ongoing call box maintenance costs, and for the potential to place additional 511 roadside assist signs. We have some out there already to let folks know that they can call 511 toll-free to get roadside assistance, including service from the Freeway Service Patrol when and where that's available. The CVR SAFE, we are not alone in the consideration of removing call boxes throughout the state. SAFEs are considering this because of these increases in call box maintenance costs. So we provided 4 scenarios for call box services to consider. The first scenario is the status quo, just maintain everything as we have it now. The second is a measured removal, where we'd remove all remaining urban call boxes, as well as all the trail side call boxes. And we have a third scenario that's rural only, remaining again, all those urban and trail side call boxes, as well as the rural call boxes that are not in very isolated areas. And our final scenario is the accelerated scenario, where we'd remove all call boxes, with the exception of there are 6 call boxes in the Forest Hill Bridge in Placer County, which Placer County pays for. They're crisis call boxes on the Forest Hill Bridge. And they'd like to keep those. So we left those in the scenario. And there's a brief table in your item that shows the scenarios and basically projects out where the CVR SAFE would be in 10 years' time. So in fiscal year 2034-35, related to the costs that would be related to the call boxes, should we maintain some or any of them, as well as there be some maintenance in there for if we put in more 511 roadside assist signs, there is some cost related to maintaining those over time. So really, we're bringing this item today. This is based on previous direction we've received from the board. And we'd like to get the director's input on these scenarios so we can bring forward appropriate changes to the call box system so we can keep the CVR SAFE program fiscally sustainable in the coming years. And I'd be happy to take your input and also answer any questions you might have.
Sorry.
Director Jennings, could you turn?
Thank you. Thank you. Just from the standpoint of usage of the call boxes,
Mhm.
The historical context in the last period of time, whatever period of time we may have, how often are they used? And do we understand if there are any unintended consequences of taking them out other than reduced costs?
They're used very little. We found in the usage of them has been declining, especially the roadside call boxes. In the past, we've talked about the heavy usage of the trail side call boxes. We've actually gotten information from most of those call boxes are answered by either city police departments or county sheriffs. We've gotten data from them where between 81 and 97% of the calls they receive are actually false calls, meaning that someone picks up the receiver, they have to send out someone because they feel it's a safety issue. They send an officer out and there is no one there who actually needs assistance. So they're sending out, sometimes hundreds of times a month, someone out to these call boxes and there's nobody there who actually needs assistance. And one of the ways to mitigate any concerns you might have about if we did remove the roadside call boxes is having that alternative of people being able to call 511 toll free and getting the same roadside assistance that they receive now from the roadside call boxes.
Has any other jurisdiction gone through this process as well? And
Sorry, go ahead.
no, I'll stop there for.
Okay, yes, we have actually Kern County down, Southern California. In 2018, they actually removed all of their call boxes at that point. And very recently in December of last year, San Bernardino County decided to do the same and remove the remainder of their call boxes as well. And other safes throughout the state are making those kind of considerations. Again, to address the cost, because though we do get those funds that come into the programs from those vehicle registrations, that those are not growing at the rate they were in the past. And that $1 is a flat amount. It doesn't increase over time or anything. So it's definitely not keeping up with the increase in costs we've been seeing.
Thank you.
Director Chap.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing this forward this evening or this morning. Is there a sense on, I guess it would apply more to the rural areas, or any of those areas, if they were to be removed in spots where there isn't cell reception, where somebody can't utilize 511, is there data on that where it's just so far out where they'd be stuck if they needed that box?
We actually did some analysis of cellular coverage from the main cellular providers. And we included a link to the map we have of all of our call boxes that we have in the system. And there is cellular coverage actually throughout our call box area. So there shouldn't be a place where someone would be out and not able to contact 511 if they did need roadside assistance and didn't have another option, their own AAA or something like that they were a part of.
Great. And the last question, what then happens? How is the $1 fee utilized if the boxes are all removed? I know you said you're putting signs up, things like that, but I would imagine there's still some money left over given the cost to maintain and have people call. Is there a scenario what the plan is for that?
The plan is for that would be to continue funding the other core services like Freeway Service Patrol. They've been seeing really large costs for the services they provide because they contract with tow companies to provide those services, as well as we'd still have to have a private call answering service and some of the other services that we have currently, because folks still talk to those same people if they call 511 for roadside assistance.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
We have a public comment from Officer Stephen O'Connell. Pronounce that correctly? Yes.
I'd like to thank the board for taking my public comment here today. I just have some information on both call boxes and 511 based on just from what I see. So my name is Officer Stephen McCumsey. I'm with the California Highway Patrol and I oversee the Valley Division Freeway Service Patrol program. Saying that, I would like to state that the views expressed today are not those of the state of California or the California Highway Patrol, and they are my own. My position with the California Highway Patrol, overseeing the Freeway Service Patrol, allows me to see the inner workings and issues with both the call box program and the 511 call service, since these programs are closely intertwined with our FSP program that I oversee. First, I'm not sure if it was brought to the attention, but I would like to second Jennifer Dahl's memo that she submitted. I also attended the statewide Motorist Aid Committee, and I'd agree with her report on both the call box and 511 programs. First, I'd like to give some information on call boxes. I reviewed the SACOG report, would like to also recommend the accelerated option, keeping those 6, which was my next question. I didn't know I was going to ask where those were going to be located, but it sounds like those 6 are fine with us there to provide service up there on the bridge. Also, I take this directly from the SACOG website, and I'll read verbatim here. SACOG manages the Sacramento's Region's Highway, Bike, and Trail Call Box Program, a cooperative effort that has put call boxes on about 750 miles of highway in a 7-county area. The boxes provide motorists in need with a direct link to roadside assistance and, if necessary, the California Highway Patrol via private call answering service. In addition, motorists can request roadside assistance by calling 511 toll-free. These mobile call boxes provide the same access as using a roadside call box. I then tried to look at the website to see where the current call boxes were located. I could not find any information on where the call boxes on the freeway or a trail are located on the SACOG site or an internet search. There was a link provided in the staff report showing the locations of the call boxes, but doing an internet search, I could not find this. So for example, if someone breaks down or needs assistance on the freeway, unless they happen to break down near a randomly placed freeway call box or can see it, these call boxes may not get used. Also, as mentioned on the SACOG website, the motorists can use their cell phones as mobile call boxes. And with almost everyone having a cell phone, almost everyone has a mobile call box nowadays. I also have seen some issues with call boxes during my duties with the CHP. CHP dispatchers get calls from the call box operators stating that there is a call box with no response,
30
as
seconds.
she mentioned. Excuse me? Oh, that's all I have?
No, you've got 30 more seconds and I took 10, so I'm gonna give you 40 more seconds.
Oh, why? I'm not even halfway done.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
I failed to mention that.
So with that, I'll just jump to my 511 call. So I'm not sure if any of you have tried to call 511. I have recently, just because we have to deal with some complaints on the Freeway Service Patrol side. When you call 511, the first option is for roadside assistance. Then if that is not selected, there are the following options: road reports, transit rideshare information, Bay Area 511, other nearby 511 systems, rail, weather, airport information, tourism, roadside assistance, and then comment section. I don't think many people are calling the 511 to get some of the information provided by the automated program, which is in some cases refers you to the agency that has that information. Let's see here, since I only have 50 seconds. And in closing, since I'm limited on time, we at the Freeway Service Patrol have a cost benefit analysis done on our FSP program to make sure our FSP program is getting the bang for the buck, to make sure we're running efficiently and spending our FSP funds wisely. I don't think that the funds spent on either the call box program, which I believe is a scarcely used and outdated program due to the information I've provided, and question the call box or cost per call, so to speak, or the 511 program, which seems to be not widely used, advertised, or promoted or known about, just to pull information from websites or other programs to provide the exact same information, and sometimes not up to date, or is information that is already provided on another well-known platform, is not, in my opinion, of an efficient way to spend these funds. These funds can be used for other useful programs, such as the Freeway Service Patrol, which is widely used and appreciated by the public on a daily basis. I do have pictures just to, I don't know if we can disseminate these to the board.
Yeah,
Can I?
why don't you give it to
Okay.
Lynette, our clerk?
As
And-
far as the maintenance funding that is provided, I have some pictures out in the field, and like, I'm only speaking for the ones out there on the freeway.
Yep.
These pictures do show some of the call boxes that are on the freeway currently. Those pictures were taken back in October, and they are still in the conditions you see on the picture.
Okay.
So
Well-
as of currently, they're still duct tape, broken. Some don't even have a call box in it. So you'll notice those in the pictures.
So thank you very much for your
I am open for
comment.
any questions, or if
Yeah.
you want to go further, but
And your comment, your complete comments will be put into the record. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank
for
you.
that. We appreciate that input. Lynette, do we have written comments on this item?
Yes, there is one written comment that I've been asked to read into the record. If you'd like me to go ahead and do that now.
Would you please?
Sure,
Thank you.
this is from Jennifer Dahl, the Sac Metro Freeway Service Patrol Manager with the Sacramento Transportation Authority. Dear CVR Safe Committee members, I write in support of the accelerated option presented in the staff report, as it aligns with the evolving needs of motorists and the consensus reached at the October 2024 statewide Motorist Aid Conference, the Oversight Committee for California's Call Box and Freeway Service Patrol programs. At the conference, representatives from local agencies, 16 Freeway Service Patrol and 22 Call Box programs, Caltrans, and CHP agreed that traditional call boxes are largely outdated and may not be the safest options for stranded motorists. With the widespread availability of cell phones, the need for physical call boxes has diminished, making the accelerated approach a more practical and cost-effective solution. Additionally, I strongly recommend that before investing in additional 511 signage on freeways, the committee conduct a thorough evaluation of the system's accuracy and functionality. Motorists have reported incorrect information about Freeway Service Patrol services, and test calls to 511 resulted in error messages. Additionally, the road report feature mainly lists construction sites, but lacks real-time traffic data such as CHP incidents and traffic speeds. Given these concerns, I urge the committee to prioritize ensuring the reliability of 511 before expanding its signage and to move forward with the accelerated option as it better reflects current motorist behavior and safety needs. Thank you for this consideration. And that concludes the written comment.
I keep remembering to push that button. Is there anyone who didn't submit a card who would like to make public comment? Please go to the podium.
Thank you. I'm Vice Mayor Kent from Ileton. This is a surprise to me as well that I'm interested in this topic. I wanted to point out that cell phones are awesome, and I'm glad everybody has one. They are wireless and they are battery powered. They are not reliable. Hardwired, the old school way, underground, crimped connections, terrific. When you have a public safety issue, you have to think about that. So the one thing about wired that we don't like, completely anonymous. So you can waste police time and walk away. A repeat offender on a cell phone can be traced if it's warranted. So I would suggest that you look at any high-risk areas and decide if you need that level of reliability, because the one person that needs it truly deserves to have that level of access. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Last call for public comment on this item. All right, we'll bring it back to the Board of Directors. Ms. Von Bechtel, you're looking for input on the options, is that
Yes, on
correct?
the scenarios that we gave you, I can give a little information based on the comments that we received too. All of our call boxes are actually cell phones, just so everyone knows. None of them are hardwired into anything. They just have boosting capabilities much beyond what your consumer phones that each of you probably have. So they can work in areas where potentially your consumer phone may not. Though fortunately in our area, like I said, where the call boxes are currently, there is cellular coverage that's very robust throughout our call box area. And also about the 511 system, I'm working with our staff here who manage our 511 to improve the 511 system. We're actually looking at streamlining it, similar to some of the comments we received today, to really make it about maintaining that roadside assistance access and also having basic traveler information, those highway information that it has now, and maintaining connections. People can get to contacting regional transit agencies. But some of the other things we have on there, really, that information is accessible in so many other places to most folks. It's not really necessary for us to maintain that any longer. So we're looking at that currently as well. And I can answer any other questions or take any other input you might have.
Any other directors have any other input? Yes, Dr. Sanders.
I've made this comment before, but I suspect everyone at the table is now different from when we previously discussed this. Bakersfield has done something really interesting with their program funds, and they have created a homeless program that utilizes some of these funds, and the homeless folks are sort of job trained by picking up stuff along the freeway. So and it's relatively successful. They have a lot of nonprofit partners, obviously, who support the rest of the program. But it has enabled them to sort of clean the road in the view of that level of safety, not having debris alongside the road, in exchange for funding that they got through this mechanism. And I think SACOG previously has looked at that. Obviously, we would need to find some sort of a partner to pursue something like that, using our safe resources or other resources. But that might be worthy just of our general review.
Yeah, we were fortunate enough to have them come back in 2018 and actually present to the board as well. So it's a very interesting program that they have there. Because again, like I said, they were one of the first ones that removed all of their call boxes about, I guess, 7 years ago now.
Great, any other input, direction? So this is an informational item, but you would like input on
Yeah.
your
Give
recommendation?
us a direction. That's what we're looking for, because we obviously have our own thoughts about it, but we'd like to get that input from the committee, and then we'll take this to the board as well.
Okay, and would you give us the 3 options again?
There's 4 options. There is the status quo. There is a moderated option where we remove all those urban and trail side boxes, a rural only option where we remove all those urban trail side boxes, as well as some of the rural boxes that really aren't in isolated areas per se. And then the accelerated option, which is to basically remove all of the call boxes, again, excepting those 6 that are out in Placer County that the county of Placer pays for currently on the Forest Hill Bridge.
And I hear Chair Rickman trying to weigh in here, so.
Chairman, thank you. I'll make it quick.
Supervisor Rickman, this is the clerk, Lynette. Thank
Yeah.
you for being here. We have been advised by legal counsel that as you're not eligible to vote in the meeting, that we prefer that you refrain from commenting if you're okay with that.
Yeah, that's
Please do-
okay. I was trying to get into public comment and I put it in chat. So
Yeah, that's fine.
can I make it as a public comment, Chairman? Or is it closed now?
Yes, you're welcome to make a public comment. Acting Chair Howdeshelt, are you okay that he goes ahead and gives that now?
Yeah, 90 seconds.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Chairman. Hey, just real quick, the Supervisor Rickman in San Joaquin County. One of my concerns that I do have about taking the call box, I think we have to look at some of the, the isolated places. For example, on I-5, 580, or 99, when there isn't, another off ramp for a couple of miles or any gas station or some type of facility somebody could walk off to. Because as I believe it was Vice Mayor of Ileton related to, cell phones die. So if somebody's out there stranded for a considerable amount of time and they don't have, and their cell phone goes out and they need to get assistance, I think that's something that we need to look at. That's my comment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Rickman. What's the pleasure of this committee? You would, if I'm hearing correctly, and I certainly don't want to be pulled over later by Officer McCumsey, but it sounds like the accelerated removal would be the recommendation of our law enforcement and our staff. Is that correct?
Yes, that would put the safe in the best fiscal position going into the future.
And Director Chapman, I have the same experience when I drive up I-5 where sometimes my cell phone doesn't always stay connected. And that's where I see call boxes around Williams and Willows. Are you satisfied that this accelerated problem would address it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was just my concern from the rural side of it and some of those areas. But, from what you're providing information on cell phone coverage, they're connected to cell phone towers anyway. And then I think just the piece around, coming from the public safety side with our folks here from CHP and kind of putting their backing behind this as well makes me feel comfortable. And I would move a motion if you want one to go with option 4, the accelerated version.
Director Desmond, do you have some thoughts on this?
No comments. I think the direction.
All right. So it's an informational item, but
It
I
is.
think you've gotten the direction that
Yes.
you're looking for. And
This
so-
is great. This is a great discussion and we really appreciate it.
Okay.
So we
good.
know the way we did to go and you'll hear more from us at the board meeting later this month.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody, and we'll adjourn the CVR Safe Committee and go back to the items for our Transportation Committee. And the first one up is Christina Zvensk talking about the 2025 Transportation Committee charge.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Transportation Committee. I'm excited to have you all here. Really looking forward to the year ahead. We have some pretty interesting items that I think will be coming forward to the committee and to the board this year on transportation. So the charge that you all have in your packet, there's a lot of carryover from the previous year. You can see changes, things taken out or struck out. New additions are underlined so you can see where there's some change in emphasis. I'm just going to highlight some key themes for this year. Funding, always a fun topic, going to be top of mind, I think, for a lot of us this year. So particularly our state and federal funding programs. You all, I know many of you are aware of the 2-year process we've gone through to have some new funding programs. So there's going to be decisions being made along the way this year, including today, a very important one that we'll talk about later. We'll also see today a presentation on Transportation Funding 101. It's a really good primer on how funding flows to our region from state and federal agencies, and should be a good primer for all the decisions that you'll be making throughout the year. We're going to continue on with the grant prioritization work. If you remember last year, we adopted at the board level our first ever prioritized list of grants for federal and state programs. We're going to continue to do that again this year. It's really important that we identify ways that we can come together and continue to provide that regional support as the SACOG board. So looking forward to that. Transit is also going to be on the docket a few times throughout the year. You saw Transit 101 in January. My apologies for not being there for that. We're going to have a few items, SB 125 funding, state legislative funding dollars aimed at supporting transit agencies. We're going to do some more allocations of that funding. We also are going to be working with our transit operators and providers to develop a new MOU to kind of talk about roles and responsibilities for administration of some of the federal transit dollars that come in. So you'll be seeing some of that over the course of the year as well. And then obviously continued guidance. We got some really key projects still going on, mobility zones. We have a comprehensive multimodal corridor plan along Highway 50 that's underway. Obviously CARTA, our toll authority, top of mind this year as we start to look at transitioning SACOG's role in that agency, but still being able to support the really important work that's going on our toll projects in the region and getting that agency started up. And then trails implementation. We are in the middle of a project right now, so we'll be seeking guidance from you all on that as well. So those are some of the key things. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any on the items in the charge, but really look forward to working with you all again this year.
Director Desmond.
Thank you for the report, Christine. I'm very supportive of the charge, supportive of all the work, and you're right, there's gonna be a lot certainly on your plate and on this committee's plate, but I'm happy to move the item at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions of any of the other directors? I'll open it up for public comment. Don't have any written.
There's no public comment on this item.
All right. It's been moved by Director Desmond. Is there a second? Wow. All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Abstained. Thank you. We'll next move to item 3, unmet transit need findings for the Sacramento Regional Transit District, Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties and the cities therein. Ms. Von Bechtold.
All right, good morning again. Barbara Von Bechtold. I lead our unmet transit needs process that we do every year. Before you is the unmet transit needs findings that will apply to next fiscal year, so 25-26. Just brief background, the State Transportation Development Act, or TDA, requires that SACOG make annual unmet transit needs findings for the regional transit district and TDA eligible jurisdictions in the 4 counties. TDA statutes require that SACOG follow a specific process in making an unmet transit needs finding for each jurisdiction. And staff has carried out that process. Again, that'll apply to next fiscal year. And that's an attachment A in your packet. The transit service requests received during the unmet transit needs process have been evaluated by our social service transportation advisory councils. We have 3, one in Sacramento, one in Yolo County, and there's a joint one in Yuba and Sutter counties. And they support the recommendations. And those are found, we summarized all of them in attachment B, and then there's detailed summary of all the comments we received and the findings made on them in attachment C, D, and E. And completion of the process allows SACOG to continue apportioning those TDA local transportation funds for the coming fiscal year to all of our transit operators and jurisdictions that are eligible to use those funds. So we're asking the Transportation Committee to recommend to the board to approve the minutes of all our public events and hearings that are held on unmet transit needs, and to adopt the attached resolutions regarding the fiscal year 2025-26 unmet transit needs in each county, the cities therein, as well as the Sacramento Regional Transit District. And I can answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions from the directors? Yes, Albert.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Being from Winters, I'm looking over the comments and the surveys made for the couple hours spent at the farmer's market, but it seems to be the only outreach made into Yolo County.
Correct.
Yolo County has 4 cities, Winters being one of them, which is in great need of some additional transportation services. Our current levels, when they went to the B line, they eliminated the 220C line, which connects Winters to the University of California.
Mhm.
There's a sizable workforce that lives in Winters that depends on the B line, on the 220C to go back and forth to work. And so none of that gets reflected in an unmet need from my point of view in reading this. And granted, I'm a newbie here, but I do, wherever I go on a commission or direct, I need to speak up for my little city because we're often overlooked because we're off in a corner. But I also speak for the other small settlements around the county. So I think it's important that if you're going to do outreach, you need to reach out and not just go to the urban centers. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Sure. And our current process limits the number of hearings. We used to have far more hearings. We had 14 to 15 every year. That's now 5. So we are only able to go to usually one location in each county, with the exception of Sacramento County, because we're required to go to 2 separate locations, one in the urbanized area and one in the southern part of the county that's outside the urbanized area. But we do have advertisements for all of the unmet transit needs processes on all of the transit vehicles for YOLO Bus, SAC-RT, all of the other transit operators, Yuba Sutter, in the 4 counties that we hold this process for. So there is other options for people to contact us. They can call us, they can text us, they can email us. We have a comment page on our website. It is published by all of our transit operators as well, publish that information. We put up information at libraries, all the places like the people gather out in the community. So we do try to make that outreach so it's getting to the folks that are even in small communities. That's, I realize we're in that one location. We try to go out into those, do public events now more than we hold formal hearings, because people aren't always comfortable coming to some place like this and talking about their needs in a public setting like that. So we do make every effort to reach out to folks as best we can in the process we currently have set.
Thank you.
All right, any other directors have questions? I don't have any comment cards. Are there any, or speaker cards? I'll open up for public comment. Close public comment, bring it back to the directors and ask for a motion. Or moved. Yep. Moved by Director Desmond, second by Director Chapman. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Abstentions? None. Okay, thank you very much. Next, we'll move to item 4, state funding program, Ms. Svensk.
All right. I'm gonna wait for the PowerPoint. Okay, thanks again. So today we have an action item in front of you related to our new state transportation improvement program funding round. Just a quick recap, since I think we have some new folks, at least to the committee. This is the process that we went through over the last 2 years. We were required to kind of take a look at how we do our federal funding, but as part of that, we also decided to take a new fresh look at how we do our state funding round as well, utilizing what's called the STIP dollars, or the State Transportation Improvement Program funding. So today we are where that yellow box is. We've gone through all the blue, and the green is what we have to look forward to with this program over the next coming months. But we have had, our working groups at both the board and state level that have really informed how we develop these guidelines. And so now we're at the point here where we're ready to adopt a budget for this program so we can open up the call for projects and actually get things funded in our region with these dollars. A reminder on the goals, these really reflect the established goals of SACOG in our region, but also incorporating what we heard as priorities from our local partners and regional agencies here through the funding round working groups, including the board members. There were 6 board members, 1 from each county, that sat on this committee or this working group, and provided a lot of insight to what they're hearing and what they're seeing and what they would like to see reflected in our goals in our program. So generally speaking, the STIP program was sort of centered around concepts like state of good repair. Certainty of funding was a really big one. regional supportive projects, and ensuring that funding decisions were really made with regional goals in mind. So the structure is, this is new. So we have these county shares that are calculated and created by the California Transportation Commission, or the CTC. They allocate shares out to each of the counties across the state. And this is for us as the RTPA in the region. We are responsible for the 4 counties: Yolo, Yuba, Sutter, and Sacramento counties. What we have done is created a program with 2 different sort of sub-programs. We have the county programs where funding kind of goes back to the counties for a program to figure out how to be funded through a competitive process. And then the option to do a regional set aside where we collectively agree that there are some regional projects out there that are worth putting some funding on, that will advance regional priorities, show partnerships, things that we all agree are really important to move forward with regardless of what jurisdiction they're in. So that is sort of how we have structured this program. The amount of funding available, as I mentioned, the shares are calculated by the CTC. This is based on population and lane miles. This is really important to think about because this is how we're able to sort of balance our urban and rural needs in our region. If we just looked at population, it would skew very much towards our super urbanized areas and leave out some of our more rural areas in the region. So this is how the state does it. We do not do these calculations. This is reflective of what the state is looking at in terms of the funding available for our 4-county region. And I'll just note, this is 2 years worth of funding, not 1 year. So we are allocating out 2 years worth of funding in this program. So one of the decisions today is not just adopting the budget, but also trying to determine and coming up with a recommendation for the board of how much we want to do as a set aside for a potential support of a regional project. These are the 3 scenarios that we'd like you to consider today. You can see there's an option with no set aside and 100% of the funding going back to the counties for those programs, a 10% set aside option, and a 20% set aside option. So I will give you a little bit of time to kind of reflect on this and see them side by side. But these are really there to just show you the range of the possibilities of what could be. I think it's important to remember that there's no sort of magic number in terms of what's good for the set aside. I think it's really what you all decide is being meaningful for a project in the region. And we'll talk a little bit about what potential projects could be associated with that set aside. But one thing on the county programs, I just want to note, it's encouraged that agencies work kind of collaboratively together on this process. And what I mean by that is this is the first time we're having this guarantee of funding going back to each of the counties. This is a kind of big deal, but we still want these projects to be performing well and be meeting our goals, performing. We have our PPA tool, our project performance assessment tool. Projects will have to run through that. They need to be strong, competitive projects. But at the same time, we want agencies within each county to start to work together and start to figure out how can we put together a package of projects that is representative of priorities in our region that are not only going to meet the regional goals, but are going to meet the goals that we have at the local level too. So we really anticipate a process where we at SACOG are going to work collaboratively with the agencies as well to kind of go through the process with them, which creates a little bit more transparency, I think, than there has been before in how projects are awarded, where the funding is going and how they're being evaluated, which we think is a very beneficial thing to this process. So we're really looking forward to that actually and getting a better sense for us at the regional level of what the local needs are. The other thing to note too, you can see there's kind of a variance in terms of how much money is available to each of the counties. No surprise, some of the smaller counties have a much smaller number than say Sacramento. That's to be expected. One thing that the counties are able to do, whether you're large or you're small, is bank the funding. This is a common practice in rural RTPAs in California. If you felt like, the number that you see up there was not going to be able to help you achieve something with the projects that were STIP eligible, you could bank those for future years and have sort of more available to put towards projects. So that's not just available to rural agencies, that's also available to all the counties. So just a strategy to keep in mind as you look at this. But to talk a little bit more specifically about the set aside, I think there's three really important questions that we need to ask. Obviously, what projects could be considered? What are the funding needs of those projects that could be considered? And how will the projects be evaluated? So, I mean, I think first, the obvious thing is that it needs to be STIP eligible. There's some requirements and STIP guidelines of what can and can't be funded by STIP. So that's sort of a no-brainer. But I think the way that we would recommend approaching this is we've just gone through, and I mentioned this in the charge, the first ever process of having a board adopted list of prioritized projects. These are things that the board collectively agreed are very important for our region, and we want to stand behind them. And I think it's really important to think about all of the different strategies that we can employ at the board level for continuing that support. And one of them is putting money on those projects and really showing the support from the financial perspective, not just going to DC and advocating for the project, sort of putting your money where your mouth is type of concept. So sort of selecting from that list, but recognizing that both Yuba and Sutter are not on that list. And that is because at the time that that list came out, they did not have a project that they were prepared to submit for consideration. So we would recommend having Yuba and Sutter, if they felt there was one that would be competitive and eligible, submitting a project to that pot for the set aside consideration as well. So it's across the 4 counties rather than leaving them out. Now, they may not have a project, and that's okay. We want to open the door for that so we can really think regionally on this. On the funding needs side, you know, obviously the question is, does the available amount in the set aside meet the needs of a project in a meaningful way with the overall funding plan? That is going to vary depending on the project. Looking at the project requests on the grant prioritization list, there's funding needs ranging from $3 million up to $100 million. So, you know, I don't think the reality is that this funding is going to fill some gap, but it will make a difference. It will help with a match, for instance, or help fill some sort of phase that might be needed on the project. So that's another important consideration. And then in terms of how the projects will be evaluated, the staff report does include the criteria that we're looking at. So it's pretty consistent with how we would be looking at the county projects. But I would also say that there's more of the emphasis on that regionalism, the regional nature of the project, the partnership aspect of the project, and really the funding plan, I think, is going to be a really big part of it for that. So as you think about all of this, you know, I do want to say there's merit to all 3 scenarios, the 0, the 10, and the 20. We're not going to put them up there if there isn't merit to any of them. But I think what I would just impress upon you is that you have started this really great thing of showing support for regional projects. And I think this is a way that you can continue to show that support and make all of that work actually actionable and mean something for the region. I think that also helps when we go back to DC to be able to say, these are all the things that we're doing to support these, and you should support them too. So I won't spend a lot of time on the next steps, but just a reminder, what you're doing today is you're approving the budget, letting us kind of go forward with opening the call for projects so we can get started on this, with awards potentially coming in June to you for adoption, and then we can put them in the TIF, which we have a timeline for in August, and that's kind of driving all of this. So, and then we'll concurrently be working on the federal one, which will be a whole nother one for you to consider. But just a reminder today, your action is to adopt the STIP budget, including this split, which we'll obviously have time to talk about, but then also authorize staff to open the call for projects for the STIP funding round. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, provide any additional information as you kind of consider this. And if you'd like, I can go back to the split slide. You can see. Yeah.
Thank you for your report, directors. Questions? Director Desmond, Vice Chair Desmond.
Acting Chair Howard. Thank you. First of all, it's great to be back on the Transportation Committee. I wasn't here last year. We had some of these discussions, but I want to really start out by just giving unequivocal kudos to SACOG staff for this effort that you've undergone for the last few years to look at the competitive funding round and some changes to it. I think this is a body that is inherently, there's some inherent tension between our local, objectives and goals, and not letting that dominate and take away from a regional focus. We have to kind of do both at the same time, and sometimes they conflict a little bit. And so this was really an effort, to give the counties outside of Placer and El Dorado County, of course, a little more flexibility and control over these funds that we can have a little more control over. So I think this has been great, Christina, and looking at you and James and everybody else who's been involved in this. You have been outstanding in your collaboration with all the different municipalities and the counties in this discussion. So I really thank you so much for that. I think this is going to be a really big improvement for SACOG, and I think help allay some of our concerns when we deal with our individual constituents and our individual jurisdictions while not sacrificing the regional priorities. So, so thank you for that. A couple of questions on the set aside, because I know that's the biggest thing. And I know I think this committee had a discussion about this last year. I apologize that I'm coming late to the party in terms of that discussion. With respect to the funding for other regional programs, now certainly let me ask you this first. STIP funding, Christina, accounts for what percentage of the total transportation funding in general?
It's a good question. I think the federal programs, we're looking at, what is it, about 100 and?
It's about 50. So if you annualize it, you've got 55 million in federal programs for the competitive programs. And then you've got 16 million a year for Sacramento, or 20 million.
Because if you
total.
annualize it, because this is 2 year.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
So apples to apples, that's the comparison.
Now, and we have obviously a lot of those federal funds that wouldn't be part of this STIP. We have used those for regional projects,
Yes.
right? Including projects where they're eligible for Placer and El Dorado County.
Correct.
So that's what some of my thinking around this is, this is certainly a big change. I'm very interested in the perspective of El Dorado and Placer County that don't have a set aside for regional programs with the STIP funding, obviously, what their experience is. I know we only have a couple folks here or just one or two from Placer County. My inclination is to either try it this year with a zero set aside or a very low amount. And I know that may put me at odds with some of my colleagues here. I do think the banking element that you mentioned is really, really important. If we do have something we want to fund, maybe withhold a little bit of that money and provide a little more money in 2 years down the road, we would have the ability to do that within our county. So I'm curious what my colleagues think about it, but I do think I'm very confident that within Sacramento County, for instance, our relationship among all the jurisdictions, we're going to be able to work very well collaboratively within our county, as I'm sure Yolo County and Sutter County and Yuba County will be able to do the same things within their county and with this additional flexibility we have. My preference would be to, again, try it this time around with a zero set aside, knowing that we also have other funding sources, federal funding sources for regional programs, and also knowing that we're not locked into whatever we do this year. Is that correct, Christina?
That is correct. Yep. The decision will be made every single time we do a STIP funding round, so it can be reflective of whatever the current environment is or the needs are. So you're not setting something in perpetuity today.
Okay, so I'll just end my comments with how I began. Thank you again for all this and all the work and all the conversations and all the collaborative efforts. Thank you.
Yes.
Through the
Director
chair.
Baumgarten.
My thanks to Christina, James, and the others that worked. I was on the funding working group. That was my indoctrination into SACOG as an alternate. I think that the comments that Director Desmond have made are certainly ones that I also echo. As one of the smaller counties, the issue of setting aside a portion of our allocation, if you will, is obviously something that brought forward a lot of a discussion during the working group. But I, for one, really think that a regional set aside is reasonable. I think it provides an opportunity for a joint project somewhere that benefits all of us. And therefore, for me, working through the funding group, I think that was a notion that was carried forward from that funding group. I do and have just learned now that obviously there are other regional from Placer and from El Dorado County that they have access to regional. I guess that's what I'm hearing, right? Is that they they do have an opportunity to do regional projects, but not in the STIP.
Right, they each have their own STIP dollars because they're their own RTPAs. And so we don't have any coordination with them on how they use their regional, but they are part of our funding round for the federal dollars. So there's the potential for
Okay.
that.
You know, I look at this as a pretty dynamic thing. It's apparently is a big change for SACOG. And bring a program like this forward where there might be an opportunity to everyone to participate in a mutually beneficial project to the region. I personally am in favor of the 10% set aside for, at least the first year, just to kind of see how that all works. Again, it could work, it could not work. And then I think we'd be dynamic enough to change if it needed to be updated. Thanks.
Other directors? Director Sanders?
This issue's come up before, in previous years here at SACOG, and I've generally weighed in on the side of competition, which was not exactly on the screen. But I'd like to see, or hear from staff a little bit about competition and how that plays into decisions either in county or with regard to set aside.
Sure. So for the in-county, it is considered a competitive program for each of the counties. So they're not competing against one another, they're competing within the county. The one thing that we are going to do this year that we haven't done, because if you can see, some of those numbers are really small. I'm thinking like YOLO and Yuba and Sutter, particularly Yuba and Sutter, $2 million-ish. Not a lot of competition, right? If you're talking about one, maybe two projects being submitted for that amount. I would say you scale that up, Sacramento County is going to have the same issue. There's probably only a finite number of projects that they'll be able to submit to get to that number. So what we are going to be doing in terms of scoring, and we talked a little bit about it in the staff report, we at the staff will develop a threshold of some sort of score that we want every single project to meet. So if you submit something and you don't meet that threshold, you're not going to get funded. You still have to meet standards, right? We're not just going to fund anything. But I think what we want to do this time, and part of it is because this is new and this is a new process. We've never had color of money programs before. We've always sort of programmed it on the back end. Working through this process with the county. So running through our PPA tool, running through the projects with them that they want to submit and being able to say, this is not going to meet our threshold. You need to rethink this and come back with something else. So there still is a competitive aspect, but it's not competitive against one another. More of how can this be competitive in terms of getting the score that we need to make sure it is actually doing something for our region. So it's not pitting people against each other, which I think is with the amount of money that we're talking about. And if we're really trying to come together as a region, I don't think that that's the right sentiment that we're trying to put into this. So there's standards. We want people to score well. We want things to perform well. It's just a different way of getting to that than we have before. So on the set aside program, it's very similar. Even if there's the list of the grant prioritized projects, we are still going to be comparing those to one another. So those will be competing against one another. Which one is going to be most successful? Which one is really moving the needle more for us from a regional perspective in terms of our goals regionally that we have in our blueprint or MTP? How are we going to find the best one of those to be really putting our weight behind when it comes to the dollars? So there's definitely that competition there. It's just a different way of kind of viewing it with both of the programs.
And the jury in those competitions is
Mhm.
never us. The jury in those competitions is a bunch of professionals you bring in
Correct.
from our agencies.
Well, yes. And one thing that we really have to balance is the potential biases and conflict of interest, which I know you know very well. So looking at outside the region as well to find subject matter expertise, finding that within our region, but people that are not going to be submitting to the program so that there isn't that bias, but still that very much understanding of the regional issues that we have and whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish in terms of the performance outcomes. So for sure, definitely a widespread panel on that.
And Director Sander, you've been through, as you said, so many of these, right? And we've had many conversations about them before the fact and after the fact. The scoring rubric is in the packet. Was that adopted as part of the framework last year?
The criteria.
The criteria. And I would just say, again, from our experience, and many of you may have this same experience, You really want to make sure that you have something that is defensible, something that is, there's a quantitative evaluation tool, right? That after the fact, because there will be more projects guaranteed, right, than there will be funding, even if it's county by county. So something that you can rely on, say, look, this is how this was evaluated within this county and this county and this county is really important after the fact. Because as you know, and you remind us all the time, we have way more needs than we have available funding. And 31 million in Sacramento sounds like a lot, but it is, more need than that, right?
And is there a flexibility question here about how flexible these funds are versus others we deal with that are awarded on a competitive basis?
Yeah, I would say that our federal STVG or RSTP funds are probably more flexible than this is. There's some very specific guidelines that the state puts out for what can and can't be used. There's no operations here, for instance. It's capital projects. There's no just standard maintenance projects like an overlay. That's not going to be utilized through here. And so what we have outlined in our guidelines that were adopted in October are some very specific kind of topical areas that we're looking at. Like we are really looking, these are state dollars, right? CAPDI, supportive types of projects, things that are supporting those goals. So I think we have like trails, we have public transit, we have complete streets type projects. Those are the things that we would be looking to fund through here within whatever parameters we can. So it's as flexible as the STIP will allow us to be.
Director Chapman?
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for your comments on this so far. Two quick clarifying questions and then a couple of comments. So whatever moves forward here today doesn't come back to the full board on the 20th, or does it?
Your recommendation
Today, does it go up to the board?
It's going to the board
On
on the 20th. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then just to clarifying with Vice Chair Desmond, so this is a 2-year funding cycle, but next year we would have the ability to change it whatever direction we went, even though it's that 2-year cycle.
Sure. So the next time we would do this would be in 2027. We're in 2025, right? So 2027. So leading up to that, before we open that and adopt a budget, you'll have the same conversation.
Right, but these dollars can't be changed after
Those
the move on the
dollars,
20th.
they will be different. It depends on what the state estimates.
Right,
Yes,
but I
we
mean
don't
the-
change them.
But I mean the zero set aside, or
Yes.
that
you
would
can-
stay the same for
No,
all
you
these
can
dollars.
change that.
Sorry, just to clarify, I think I'm hearing your
2 years.
question. Yes, these are 2 years. So once the board makes an award later this year, you're locking into
yeah.
whatever decision
That's
you
Sorry.
made on the
I
sub
thought you
side.
meant the next
I was
time
afraid,
we
yeah,
were
no, I
doing
just
it.
wanted to make sure I understood what that was.
That's staying
These
for
are
2
locked in.
years.
Got it. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. And I, this is one of the things I think for me coming on this board 2 years ago, that's tough to balance, right? There's a regional perspective to the work that we do, and a 10% set aside means less dollars to the city that I represent, who I'm sitting here representing today, right? But from a regional perspective, and for us in Yolo County, it's more dollars that can then be used from the regional perspective. And I think it's hard, right, for large projects to get funding. A lot of it requires matches. And a set aside allows smaller jurisdictions or all of our jurisdictions to compete to get these over the finish line when we need the dollars. I think some of us, only Sac County is a self-help county, which has a sales tax measure, right, where those funds come in. So I think that there's obviously funding uncertainties there as well. And we all know that and understand that. But I do think that the 10% set aside allows some of these other jurisdictions to get some of those dollars. The most recent example, and I said this in our last meeting, right, is the I-80 project. I think around $8 million was awarded to Yolo Transportation District to get that project up and going and moving. And we wouldn't have that project moving in that direction if there wasn't that type of set aside or that work for us to go and get those dollars. And I think the important side of that, as we all know, right, is that we don't operate on islands, and that there is benefit to everyone sitting around this table in these different jurisdictions when these projects improve. When you look at what happens on I-80 and what the impact is to folks on the east side of the causeway, I think that those are real impacts and helps improve transportation across the board in our county. So I think the banking piece is great. I think that that's something that I would think that some of the smaller jurisdictions can use and move forward with. But I do think that, in this first round, it makes sense. I do support a 10% set aside. Thanks.
Any other directors have any? I want to get back to Vice Chair Desmond's question about Placer County. we pool all our money, we borrowed against our federal tip, and we don't get any money until 2030, so. And it all went to Highway 65, which is, you know, the spine that connects Lincoln, Rockland, Roseville, and Placer County.
I guess,
Yeah.
Chair Howard,
Acting.
both acting chair, yeah. Chair for the day. But not having any set aside for regional funds, in particular with the STIP funding. Do you think that has hampered Placer County and El Dorado County?
Can't speak for El Dorado County. I don't think it's hampered Placer County.
Through the chair,
Hey, yes, Director Baumgart.
could you maybe give us a little forecast of what do you see on the federal funding side?
No.
I'll jump in just real quick. First of all, come to Cap to Cap. Come to the tour before, but stay for Cap to Cap. This is more than ever at the federal level, so we don't have a crystal ball. But one thing we can say is we need to hang together. If there's a point in which this region and the entire 6 counties needs to be unified with one voice, now's it. So, regardless of which side of the aisle your member of Congress sits on, we need to have a single voice, a unified voice. We need to make sure that we are investment ready. We make the case for those federal funds to come in for our projects. So it really, really is important. How this is all going to shake out and some of the policies we've seen coming out of USDOT, the Congress has to reauthorize our federal transportation bill by September of 2026. Historically, they kind of kicked the can a little bit, and there's also not a large excess of money in the Federal Highway Trust Fund either. So these are going to be tough issues, but we need to be present in DC. We need to be talking to our delegation, our members of Congress and their staff and districts, right? And we need to keep making our case. That's all we can say right now.
I'd add one thing to that. Briefings I had last week, the National League of Cities in DC and with the administration were that they're going to have a bias towards local jurisdictions in funding on transportation as opposed to state departments of transportation. And that was also true in the last Trump administration, that there was a little more bias towards local government. In other words, direct funding as opposed to, oh, states, you take care of it.
And that's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Well, in general, nationwide, when you trust the states to take care of the locals, the states get taken care of, locals not necessarily. That's sort of there are various stimulus things, like during the Obama years, there was a stimulus plan for infrastructure. And there were states like, I think, New Mexico and Arizona, and I don't remember the third, Minnesota, who decided that their state highway system should receive 100% of the stimulus and that no local jurisdiction should receive any. Because after all, they were the state, they knew best. So that's how they rolled it out. Our state did not do that, surprisingly, but maybe not surprisingly, but that's always a risk.
Thank you, Mr. Corliss, for taking and stepping off the edge and looking at a cloudy crystal ball. All right, if there are no other directors' questions or comments, I'll open it up for public comment. And one of the things I failed to read in early on and at the risk of being pulled over by the officer who spoke earlier is that we have a 3-minute limit on public comment. Is there anyone who would like to make public comment? All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Yes.
I will, now in hearing some sentiments from my colleagues, I'm fine with the 10% set aside, and I'm happy to make a motion to that effect. One thing I want to throw in there is, I just want to make sure we don't get to a point where the 4 counties who participate in this and set aside money for a regional project, that doesn't somehow negatively impact us with respect to regional projects for the federal funding. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
I mean, I don't want it to be, well, those 4 counties already set aside some STIP funding, so we're not going to give them, the same consideration as the other counties that don't have that set aside from STIP funding. Okay.
Yeah, no.
I just want to make sure that doesn't become a byproduct of this decision. So with that, then I would make a motion to support the 10% set aside.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Abstain?
And Director Desmond, if that project happens to be a project in Placer County, we'll certainly let you know. Just kidding.
That completes our action items. We'll next move to informational items and an overview on transportation funding. Ms. Finsk, floor is yours. Who's doing it?
It's gonna be a tag team effort here, but we're just waiting for the PowerPoint to come.
Acting Chair Haddishell, I'd just say these to kick it off, as you, many of you know, and you just had this conversation, there has been a lot of conversation on funding. Transportation funding, how it works, federal funding, state funding, discretionary grants, formula, highway, right? So we wanted to have you get through your STIP item, and now this is going to be basically a 101. We'll do our best we can at explaining how all of this works, ideally demystifying it a little bit for you. So with that, give it to the staff.
All right, so more funding, so fun. Okay, so today we're going to talk about really important SACOG's role in transportation funding, what's included in transportation, where does the money come from? Like we've been talking about, there's federal, there's state, there's local sources, and then a little bit about our formula and competitive grant programs. You've heard about one today. We know there's more, so we'll talk a little bit about those as well. So just a quick overview. What is your role in transportation funding? This is really a guidance, oversight, recommending body for us on how we distribute, allocate, make decisions on funding at all three of those levels, state, federal, and to some degree local where we can. For local funds, we tend to just sort of allocate those out via formula. That's the way it's done, but we do have our competitive programs, and that's really where we want to have your oversight, your guidance in how we go about those, whether it's creating framework or actually making the decisions, because there's tough decisions along the way the whole time. So your role is very critical to this. And so I think we're going to go through this kind of a 101 of all of this. And then I think you'll start to be able to put the pieces together of how that role fits with some of these different programs that we have in our region. So Eric? Oh, I'm doing this one too. All right. So what is included in transportation? As we know, passenger vehicles, freight, transit, active transportation programs, things like technology and programs. ITS is a big thing right now. But also maintenance and rehabilitation. That is a big one in our region that we heard during the funding round working group a lot. Maintenance needs on our roads. So there's about $1 to $2 billion annually that comes into our 6-county region through our regional funding programs that we've talked a little bit about. That's about $350 million of that 1.2. We have the Transportation Improvement Program, which are things that are programmed into our TIP. That is about 500 to $1 billion of that. And then there's the local investments, which is the city and county programs, and that's about 200 to 500 million. So you can see there's a lot kind of going on there in terms of how we approach operations of transit, capital for both roads as well as transit, and then the maintenance programs that our cities and our counties have in order to make our roads amenable to transit and walking and biking and vehicles and all the things that we need to have.
Okay, so I'm going to walk through the next part of this and really talk about 3 levels, as Christina mentioned, right? The federal, state, and local money. And while you've heard about billions of dollars, as you just talked about on the STIP level, there aren't billions of dollars that come to this board, unfortunately, to award out to all the very important needs we have, both on the highway side, you know, the local streets and road, and our transit needs. So I want to first kind of contextualize things from what we have in our assumptions for our long range plan, which roughly approximates to kind of the same amount of money that's available every year. And so going forward from this point, we've tried to do a division of colors so that you can kind of follow the ball, right? So the blues are the federal, the orange and yellow is the state funding, and the green is the local funding. And what I'll just highlight here, right, is that a lot of the funding that pays for transportation, both our long-term assumptions as well as in the short term, come from the basic things, right, of your assessments, new developments. Yes, there's a measure in Sacramento County, but there's also some additional citywide measures in some cities around the country, around the region that pay for transportation. And that makes up a really important part of the money we have, both to maintain the system we have, but also to improve it to meet our goals. And then this 5% is really the money that is controlled by SACOG and is available to award out. So first, zooming out to the big picture, what I don't have on this slide deck here is what it looks like nationally, right? So if you annualize that long range bill that James just mentioned, there's about $113 billion that the federal government has to spend on transportation every year. Much of that money goes to the Federal Highway Administration, which in name, right, sounds like it goes to state DOTs, and much of it does. But the other primary recipient are MPOs like SACOG that make awards, and that's where our federal funding for the competition goes through. Critically, though, one of the things that changed during the last bill is that there was a big increase in competitive funding, right? And you've heard James talk about the need for us to rally together and go seek out competitive funding. For context, it's really only about 13% of those federal highway dollars that are competitive nationally. The rest of it's going to states and MPOs to pay for the needs within those states and within those regions. It's a similar on the transit side. It's a little bit more of a 50-50 split between the funding that goes to pay for the existing capital projects in our region, but there's also many capital competitive grants that SACRT and others go directly and lobby for. So just to briefly kind of highlight from a state level, of that 100 billion roughly, about 9 billion ends up in California. And most of that goes through Caltrans first before it arrives with us. And then those grants are part of what goes through our program that Christina mentioned that goes into our transportation improvement program. So not necessarily our local decisions, but when you're looking ahead to our federal funding program, we're looking at about 55 million on average over the last 10 years or so. Our region's gotten about 50 million in competitive federal grants. So it's kind of one for what we need to go after. So if you kind of turn that last column on its side, you can see what's available competitively in our region. And so again, there's the programs that we talked about earlier, about 55 million between the air quality related highway funds, the state transportation block grant, surface transportation block grant funds, right? Those are the flexible funds that we use for our big funding programs. Again, they're called highway funds, but we actually pay for transit and other investments through those funds. The carbon reduction program is a new one that started during the bipartisan infrastructure law. So we'll see if that is something that's a priority to come through. One of the things, as Director Sander mentioned, there's this interest in pushing things to the local. A big question is how many of these new competitive programs get switched over into formula programs? And then crucially, like in your advocacy, what's happening to push that to the states versus what goes directly to you as the regions and MPOs to determine what projects in those formulas. And then finally, we kind of lump together some transit programs to identify what SACOG and SACRT is the designated recipient for the urbanized area put out on formula. So yes, it is a formula, but it's based on an earned share calculation that we'll talk about at a future meeting. And then there's a small set aside as well for discretionary for transit operators to compete there. So moving over to the state side, State of California is a little bit more complicated and has things done differently than at the federal level. And so there's about 22 billion that the state collects through gas taxes, motor vehicle registrations, sales taxes, all these things that pay for transportation. Some of them filter down to the local level, some of them filter down to our level, some of them stay at the state level to pay for the maintenance and operation of the state highway system. But some of them also pay for the direct services like you heard earlier with the CHP and the Freeway Service Patrol, DMV, and others. So when you go down a level from that, what funding really comes to the region? So State of California divides Caltrans into districts, right? And we have our partners from District 3 here at the table. And so we just talked about the STIP. There's another part of the STIP that's the interregional TIP. And so there's funding specifically for state highways that's available. And and our state partners do get money for our region through that. There's also the SHOP, which is the highway maintenance and operations budget that the state has to take care of the highways and freeways in our region. And then, as you just discussed, the STIP is one of the crucial funding streams that comes to you all, and you have a determination on how to use those funds. But there's also two more formulaic programs that come through to us. There's the transit and local streets and roads formulas. So this is the TDA funding, this state transit assistance, state of good repair, which is state of good repair of transit funds. And those are all done kind of through a formula process, but those do go to SACOG. And then we've had these one-time SB1 transit funds, which you'll hear a lot more about this year, as Christina mentioned, where we trying to figure out how do we best put those funds to use for capital and operations purposes to get our transit operators sustainable for the future. And then finally, though it doesn't flow through SACOG, you know, part of the reason that the state wanted to increase the gas taxes through SB1 is to increase the amount of money that's flowing directly to your jurisdictions, and they did that. So in addition to the existing funding, that bumped that up quite a bit. So there's about 100 million that comes to our region, but doesn't go through SACOG, goes directly to your public works departments to pay for that. And then the final piece there on discretionary grants, I'll actually roll into the next slide. So keeping on the subject of SB1, starting at the far right, our region has been pretty successful in going after getting competitive statewide grants to the tune of about $100 to $150 million a year over the last 6 years. So that's really great, right? It really leverages the funding that you have, again, kind of similar to the federal level, about a 1-for-1 or better than the formula funds that are flowing to you, coupled with the STIP funds that are also coming to the region that can go out to transportation projects. And then the final piece that I'll touch on here before handing it back to Christina is the local piece, right? So heard about Measure A in Sacramento County, $175 million for the county and its jurisdictions to pay for transportation needs. Transit fares, though not a significant share of the overall budget, is really important to our transit operators across the region. That generates between $20 and $25 million a year. But again, another huge source are all those general fund infusions of funding, impact fees, but we know those are very volatile, and it's difficult to count on some of those things for longer term transportation projects. So I'm going to hand it back to Christina to kind of give you a high level overview of the programs that we talked about today and some that are coming up in the future to the board.
Thanks. So the blue boxes that you see are federal, orange are the state dollars. So we've talked a little bit about some of the orange, the STIP. You can kind of see the figures there of what we estimate on an annual basis is coming in through that program. The 6-county competitive program, that's the federal program that we've just redone. That's about $55-ish million a year that we anticipate coming in through that for the 6-county region. On top of that, we have priority programs. So this was part of the guidelines. We talked about this. Historically, that's been the Mode Shift program. Engage, Empower, Implement, our EEI program, was funded as a priority program. Also CCAT, which is with the Air District, Spare the Air. And then this coming year, we have 2 new ones. Freeway Service Patrol is another one that was adopted through the guidelines, as well as the pavement management system that we've been talking about doing, which is going to help with the sort of maintenance-focused issues in our region, getting everybody on the same playing field and having the same amount of data so we can understand what the needs are. Carbon reduction is one that is new through the IIJA, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. We did our first round of that last year, where we funded projects from the Trails Plan as well as zero emission type of projects. We will be having another call for that to help implement mobility zones, as well as to continue to implement the Trails program. Those are all federal sources. Additional on the state, in addition to the STIP, the Active Transportation Program, we just went through that process. We're about to announce some awards here with you all soon. As you know, this varies year by year. This past year, we had not a lot of money because of the California budget issues. We hope that doesn't continue because the year before, we had quite an influx of dollars to be able to put towards active transportation in our region. So that's an important one that's really hard to gauge what it's going to look like year over year because it is so contingent upon the state budget. But those are some of the important regional programs that we oversee and administer. So kind of looking at what this looks like across the 4-county region from a funding perspective. You can see here the dark green is Sacramento County. We pull that out because that is the largest county in our region. The remaining top part, the light green, is the remaining 3 counties in our region. So what this really is showing, you can see the 2 sort of trend lines. You see one says 73% funding share, one says 74% STIP share. We just talked to you about the STIP share. That's that calculation of population and lane miles that the state uses to come up with how they distribute the funding. We think that's a pretty good gauge of kind of understanding what a potential fair share or fairness could look like when it comes to transportation funding. There's not like one way to really do it. But what you can see here, and it's really important to recognize, is that it goes up and down. It fluctuates. It's not consistent every year. There's a lot of factors that come into play when we're talking about competitive funding awards. But I think the big thing is that over time, we're looking at two decades worth of funding here. It ends up kind of evening out. And I think that's really important to remember, that it's very difficult to gauge how much money is going to be available, how that's going to flow through the counties. So it's just a good reminder that it kind of over time, it levels out. We can kind of dive a little bit deeper into this and look at really what that looks like at all those county levels. So pie chart on the left, population and lane miles, that fair share kind of CTC calculation we've been talking about, versus on the right, the actual grant awards over the last 20 years. Very much in line, I would say, with what that CTC calculation is. So it kind of shows that, again, over time, it levels out to kind of where it should be if you were to rely on that calculation, which I think is really important to kind of think about, that it's just over time, we're kind of hitting our stride and the money is going where it needs to go. Focusing on transit, because we talk a lot about these other funding sources, really road kind of focus, capital project focus. We do have some additional funding that is dedicated to transit, both competitive and formula. So again, blue is what the federal dollars are. The orange yellow is the state dollars. So on the competitive side, we administer a discretionary funding program. It's about $5 million a year. And we work with our transit partners to run a competitive process for that. That is for capital funding. It's FTA 5307 and 5339 are the 2 primary sources for the FTA funding. We've talked a little bit about SB 125. That's the one-time funding. That's about $60 million a year on average that we have been putting in our allocation plans. Like I mentioned earlier, we have another one coming up. On the formula side, it's about $35 million from the FTA for transit. And then the state, we have TDA, which is the Transportation Development Act. We have STA, State Transit Assistance, and SGR, State of Good Repair funding. Those are both, the latter is capital, the other 2 primarily focused on operating and some capital. So lots of money coming in for transit from the state as well through formula. And our role in that funding, the formula funding, is really kind of like a pass-through. We are not really engaged all that much except getting the money to who needs it and who is eligible for that money. So just to kind of go back to the role, so you can see it's really complicated. There's a lot of charts we put up there, and it took a lot of time to try to make it make sense for everybody. But it's really critical. We are stewards of public dollars, and it is our responsibility as staff, but also at the board level, to make sure that we're using those public dollars responsibly in the best way that we can. And so your guidance and your oversight on how this goes, whether it's loans strategically to advance projects or how we structure our funding programs, are really, really critical. And I can't impress upon you more like how important it is going to be over the next year or 2, especially as we navigate the federal landscape with what it's going to look like with funding coming to our region. We're going to have to be nimble, but we're going to have to make some really important decisions. So hopefully this was helpful for everybody as we go through all of this. But we're happy to answer any questions you have.
Let's share Desmond.
Sorry, once again, Christina, thank you for this. I think this is great. You know, a wise man recently said to me that we should look at what's fair over time. And that wise man was James Corliss. And so I appreciate you putting that chart. I think that's really important for us all to see, because I think we all realize as regional partners, there are going to be, you know, there are going to be deviations year to year, maybe through different cycles, but over time, it should generally correlate to our lane miles and population. So I think that's really helpful. A question I did have for you though, Christina, on that chart, would it be possible prospectively could we break out Caltrans dollars and transit dollars? I know that might be difficult. And another question, can we update this every couple of years? Is this something, you know, I don't think we've ever really done this. Those are my two questions for you.
Yeah, we can. We can look back at the awards that we've made historically through our funding rounds and can break it up by whoever received the money. I'm looking at Clint since he oversees the programming piece of it all. And absolutely, I think we should be kind of monitoring this, especially since we've just gone through this whole process to do it differently, to make sure that it is working in the way that we intend it to work. So I have no issue with coming back on a regular basis, especially after the funding rounds, to kind of say, hey, how did it shake out? How did this work? I think that'd be useful for everyone.
Through the chair?
Yep.
Over here. Thanks. This was great. I wish we had some of this as we attempted a sales tax measure in Sutter County last year, because everybody, a large proportion of portion of our constituents believe that they pay for all the roads through their gas tax. And I know that that's, not not sustaining the maintenance or improvement of the road. So this is great stuff for me coming onto the Transportation Committee. I look forward to Vice Chair Desmond's, spreading that out and taking a look at it. The regional thing, I said that earlier in my comments. All of us work here together, and I just appreciate the opportunity to kind of have this big breakdown. I did have one question. And this might be too much in the weeds, but where are we at with that pavement management system so that everybody's on the same page?
Great question. Well, there's two ways to look at it. One is we need to first figure out what that's going to look like. So we're going to start that this year. We also need the board to adopt the federal budget so that we can have the funding needed to actually run it. So that will be coming later this year from the budgetary standpoint, but we'll be working this year to kind of strategize on what that's going to look like and looking to some neighboring regions that have something similar to kind of learn what we should and shouldn't do with that. So we'll bring an update to you.
Any other directors have any comments or questions before I open up for public comment? All right, I have one card under this item from Michael Barnbaum. And Michael, I'm going to ask a favor of you because we have a number of people commenting on the next. And I know you can do this. I've heard you. 2 minutes? Can you do this in 2 minutes?
We'll try. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Very important discussion on transportation funding. Last couple years or so, I've been through exercises with at least 2 counties in the region, one which put a measure on the ballot through Citizens Initiative, and one who put the measure on the ballot through its governing body. And so the threshold of what the vote was needed for to pass in each measure was different because of how it was put on the ballot. I think local measures are very important to get very precious state and federal dollars and keep jurisdictions competitive in getting the funds that are so needed. I know in the city of Sacramento just last year, and I will recognize today in the audience the chair of Slow Down Sacramento, Isaac Gonzalez. I was at a vigil put on by their group, which noted 32 individuals in the city alone in 2024 that died and could have all been prevented if there were transportation safety measures in place. Ideas like delayed green, diagonal crossing, and other things for active
30
transportation
seconds.
and pedestrian safety measures. So I hope that we can really focus, region-wide on what we can do for next year on a transportation measure, regardless if it's 1 county, 4 counties, or all 6 counties. Thank you.
Michael, I know you can do it, and thank you for doing it. Is there any other public comment that I don't have cards for?
There's no
That's-
other public comment on this item.
Thank you very much, and I echo the comments of my fellow directors here. This is an excellent presentation that marries up really well, I think, with primer we got in June on all sorts of transportation funding, so excellent job. We will next move to our informational item number 6, regional safety targets and needs assessment. Sam?
Hello, hello, I'm Sam Schultz, and I'm here to chat with you today about regional safety targets and needs assessments. Next slide, please. Stay ahead a bit. So today I'll briefly cover the basics of federal performance metrics and target setting. Then I'll chat a little bit more about our proposal for a regional safety needs assessment, but I'd like you to keep these policy questions in mind. Should SACOG support statewide safety targets for 2025? And should SACOG expand its policy and practices to reduce fatal and serious injuries on our roadways? But what would it mean to set more aggressive targets? And what actions should SACOG take to achieve those targets? Wrong button. Go. So what is a safety target? Here are 2 charts. The chart on the left are the rate of fatal collisions per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, shows both state and Sacramento regional statistics. The side on the right is the serious injuries. So they're trending about the same. So the blue lines and bars are for the Sacramento region, and the gray lines compare those rates to the state. So you can see our 5-year rolling averages and lines have been increasing quite a bit since about 2015. And in the most recent years of data in 21 and 22, that's the latest that we can get from state databases, that our rates are much higher than the state. The targets that we talk about, the federal performance metrics targets, those are those X's on the charts. So you can see that the state is they're interpolating what is possible, looking at potential expenditures for what they can likely hit and what they report back to FHWA, the feds, for what's happening. So you can see that we don't set regional targets. We do wind up supporting the state's targets, despite seeing that the trend lines are going quite a bit higher. You've also received a number of different safety-related presentations in the past, whether it's regarding presentations from last October about the dangerous road design, where speed is the most important factor for someone surviving a crash. The design of the roadway itself, as far as prioritizing speed rather than safety, and then things that we can do quickly, such as quick builds. Those are a few photos of those in Marysville. And then we're far from finished a number of different policy proposals, such as Vision Zero policies and safe system approaches that prioritize safety before other design elements. So where does SACOG fit into safety planning and funding? So we currently focus on collecting and reporting that data. We use criteria from those collisions in programming our dollars for funding rounds. We also support local safety planning when invited, such as plans that help your local jurisdictions access specific safety program funds, such as the Caltrans Highway Safety Improvement Program, which require local road safety plans. Less than half of our jurisdictions have a required local road safety plan to apply for those funds. The very next cycle 12 of that program, concluded last fall. We expect to see those awards in the next month or so. Those are typically new traffic signals, guardrails and improvements, but they also have non-competitive requests for other bicycle and pedestrian safety elements. So let's take a step back to our policy questions. Again, should we continue to support statewide safety targets? Should we be expanding our policies and practices to reduce fatal and serious injury and roadway collisions? And what would it mean to set aggressive targets? And what actions should SACOG take? To understand some specific technical assistance that staff can support the region and other regional planning efforts, we're recommending to pursue a regional safety planning assessment. How is safety planning happening across the region, and where could it be better? The assessment content would also include that inventory of that planning, be engaging our local sponsors on those safety planning practices and data needs, and make recommendations for future regional support tasks. This is not an action item, this is an information item. That kind of task would come to you in the overall work plan for a specific scope of work. And for the content of this needs assessment, we'd be working closely with the cities and counties, Caltrans, to understand the elements that we would need to look at. I would be happy to answer questions about the scope or any of the data I displayed today.
Thank you for your presentation. Any directors have questions? Director Sanders?
We have certainly seen an uptick in fatalities in Rancho Cordova over the last 5 years. I don't have numbers at my fingertips. The largest component of those, from my recollection, has probably been homeless individuals crossing busy highways, not at a signal or on a freeway on-ramp. I'm curious if that trend has carried out statewide.
I know that when we dig deeper into the rise in fatal and serious injuries, what we do see is a rise in vehicle miles traveled on specific types of roadways. It's the difference between, say, a local street versus a highway. It's the roadways in the middle, the 2 and 4 lane and 6 lane arterials. And we do see disparities as well as far as urban versus rural and underinvested communities. So there are very specific trends that we see, but it's not a replacement for local safety planning. Director Sanders, like you mentioned, the city of Rancho Cordova has a local road safety plan. They look deeply into the collisions, and they mostly target intersections and crossings. So that doesn't surprise me that you're seeing those trends and that your own local safety planning has been looking into that as well.
Yeah, I'd say the largest category would probably be homeless individuals. Second largest category involves a DUI of some kind. And the third is Grant Line, all by itself, just as a dangerous road, has no shoulders in many cases, has dangerous bends. It was built in, I don't know, 50s. And it's just not a safe facility. So we usually clock a fatality or so a year on Grant Line from commuters.
Director Jennings?
Vice Chair.
Oh, wait, no.
Oh, who did you have? Oh, Jenny. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Was I jumping over you?
Yeah, I was gonna save the protocol for you for last.
Thanks for the presentation. This is very helpful. As I look at this particular slide and I look at the source and the time of when it's taken from 2011 to 2020, I'm just wondering from 2020 to 2025, how do we track whether or not these remain to be some of the highest sources of fatalities and crashes? And how do we track that on a local level?
So I believe it was just last year, you received a update from our regional monitoring port staff that we have online dashboards on SACOG's website that actively connect to those databases, and you can drill down and see a lot of these collisions on a map. So SACOG is a repository for a lot of that data to make it more accessible, and you can do further analysis on other comparable data sources. So we're taking it a step further than, say, the traffic incident management system that UC Berkeley maintains, statewide collision reporting from not just local cities and counties, but also the CHP. So we do offer that information. With regard to this specific slide, what you're looking at here is from the Caltrans Vulnerable Road User Assessment, which is calculating a rate of fatal and serious injuries for bicycle and pedestrian crashes. creating rates for bike and ped crashes is much more difficult. And that's something that we would look into for the regional needs assessment. But you are correct. If I went back a few slides, you'll see that our rates have gone up quite a bit. But for the most recent years, that collision data for like 23 or 24 is not yet available to us.
And maybe Director Jennings, I want to confirm with Sam, when it is available, it will get uploaded because that is part of the regional monitoring report that we launched in November and Sam referenced.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. We would also be looking into more frequent and accessible data. For instance, connected vehicle data for hard stops and near misses. If you bought a car in recent years, it's spewing that data out. Collecting that and understanding where that's happening can also be done too.
Great. Vice Chairman Desmond.
Chair, thank you for the report. I agree with Director Sanders' comments about the spike as a result of really increased homelessness. I hear a lot from the CHP partners. They handle most of the traffic enforcement in the district that I represent about disproportionate amount of pedestrian injuries and fatalities due to homelessness. I just want to know for purposes of developing a safety plan. I mean, when I was a highway patrol officer for 24 years, it was always beat into us that it's a matter of engineering, enforcement, and education. And I know a huge part of it is the engineering. I mean, we've highlighted a lot of it through some of our REI work, a lack of investments in modern, safe transportation infrastructure, how that's disproportionately affects people in underserved communities. But I want to make sure we include other partners as well. You know, I mean, the enforcement partners, the educational partners, Office of Traffic Safety. So I just don't want all the focus to be on infrastructure because I think it has to include all three of those E's. That's just my comment about it.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion.
Thank you. You know, I probably missed it in your presentation. I apologize. Does this also include the interface between light rail and other rail?
That's a great topic about transit and transit safety metrics, which transit operators report to the Federal Transit Administration. And I would love to include that as part of the scope for the needs assessment, not just the specific transit statistics like for transit safety for ridership and passengers, but also accessing our different transit centers and hubs across the region. That's typically what happens with, say, bicycle and pedestrian planning and access plans, but looking more closely at where those are occurring and if we have planned projects, I'd love to look more deeply into that.
Great. Director Chapman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Vice Chair Desmond, for your comments. That was much along the line where I was going with, and I think one of the pieces I would add to that, and I'm fully supportive of developing a regional safety planning assessment. And I think part of when you read further down the staff report, it talks about partners that we're going to be talking to and working with. And I think one of the pieces that I would encourage us as on top of the three that Vice Chair Desmond talked about is reaching out to business community representatives around impacts of these types of changes that are made. You look at AB 413 that was just passed and is being implemented in communities across the state. And I think in certain areas, there are unintended consequences of some of those pieces that move forward. So especially when it comes to commerce and ability to engage in commerce. So I would just encourage us to be working with or talking to chambers of commerce or business associations or other partners that are on that side as well.
Thank you very much. There are no other comments from directors.
Just one other comment. There's been some controversy about data with regard to these sort of reports. I think at one time UC Berkeley was keeping one set of data. The state had a separate data set. And so we would, in Rancho Cordova, see specific accidents occurring, and then those would appear in neither data set. That was a very troubling thing because in some cases it caused us to score worse on applications because, you know, fatal accidents were missed in the database. Is that still an ongoing concern?
It is. Not all jurisdictions use electronic reporting to submit their collision reports from local police departments to the state for processing. It's a very heavy lift for the CHP. And I think what you see is big differences between those databases is whether or not, say, Berkeley counts mostly the fatal and serious injuries for that kind of transportation planning, for safety planning, versus say, Caltrans has very different databases for looking at specific issues, whether or not there was road conditions were wet, or if it happened in the day or night, or they were discounting things that are not engineering issues, such as more behavioral issues like DUIs. So they have different databases for different styles of safety planning, which is just tailored to the agencies that need to use those databases. I would imagine that many of the missing collisions that you're looking for are not quite hitting what is considered a fatal or serious injury, or have yet to be reported and made it into the statewide databases.
I'd love to have that exchange offline. We have some public comment. I want to get to that public comment. And as you can hear, those who've have public comment, as you can hear, there's a significant interest and concern in this. So I don't want to cut you short, but I do want to get to everybody's public comment, and we can limit it to 2 minutes per public comment. I'm going to ask Isaac Gonzalez to come up and, hi, Isaac. Can we keep you to 2 minutes? Mike Bonbon, set the stand.
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, members of this SACOG Transportation Committee. My name is Isaac Gonzalez. I'm the founder of Slow Down Sacramento and the vice chair of the City of Sacramento's Active Transportation Commission. And I'm a community advocate deeply invested in making our region safer. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. On January 2nd, we did gather in Fremont Park to read aloud the names of 32 people killed by traffic violence in the city of Sacramento alone. Their stories being a tragic reminder of the urgency we face. I'm frequently contacted by people living outside the city limits, places like Orangevale, Carmichael, Rancho Cordova, where on Georgetown and Coloma Road, a grandmother was killed while sitting in her own home by a car, and where cars have repeatedly hit that same house since she's died in 2020. They have similar experiences of unsafe roads and dangerous intersections, because the truth is the issues we face do not recognize invisible jurisdiction boundaries. And that's why it's critical that our safety efforts are coordinated and ambitious across the entire SACOG region. SACOG has this opportunity to lead. A current recommendation to just align with statewide safety targets, while unintended, quite frankly, we don't believe it's enough. By mirroring the state goals, we're indirectly saying that some level of death on our roadway is acceptable. But it doesn't have to be that way. 0 deaths is not just a vision, it's a proven achievable outcome. The city of Hoboken, New Jersey is a powerful example. They've had 7 straight years of 0 traffic fatalities through targeted safety interventions like road diets, curb extensions, pedestrian-focused infrastructure improvements, quick build, and tactical urbanism practices. If Hoboken can achieve 0 deaths, there's no reason the SACOG region cannot adopt that same goal. And we'll never get there if it's
15
not
seconds.
our stated goal. Please take this opportunity to lead by example. Let's set a goal of 0 deaths, because no family should have to lose a loved one to something we know is preventable. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Yeah, Isaac, thank you very much. Next up, Dan Allison.
Good morning, Dan Allison, resident of Sacramento, and I'm speaking for myself today. I sometimes speak for organizations, but not today. Our transportation system is killing people. We've designed a system that kills people. We continue to fund projects that kill people. We need to change. Caltrans is not setting ambitious targets. They're like, yeah, maybe 1 less death next year. That might be nice. That's not acceptable. Walker and bicyclist fatalities and severe injuries are increasing faster than those for motor vehicle drivers and passengers. So we really need to focus on those, because that's where the real upward movement is occurring. SACOG should set more ambitious targets and not simply adopt the state targets. Rates and not numbers are the most important thing. Rates allow us to judge, are we doing better? Numbers don't really allow us to do that. There should be a target rate for walker and bicyclist fatalities and severe injuries. And of course, the response of an engineer would be, we don't have that data. How could we do that? Well, that itself is the problem. Transportation agencies collect data and neglect walkers and bicyclists. It can be done. Most do not do it. All grant recipients should have to have a safe systems approach.
30 seconds.
sometimes called Vision Zero, but it's not exactly the same thing. And if they don't have it, they shouldn't receive any funding. They need to have a vulnerable roadway user assessment and an implementation plan. If they don't have it, no funding. And the assessment is very useful and should be done, but there also needs to be immediate action on funding. We stop funding projects that kill people. Thank you.
Dan, thanks very much. And if you didn't get to present all your comments, certainly provide them in writing. Next up is Mark Harmon.
Hello. Whoops. Hello. Yeah, my name's Mark Harmon and I live in Sacramento in Rick Jennings district. And I'm commenting on item number 6 here. I'm speaking to you because I'm not homeless. But I'm a tax-paying citizen and it feels unsafe driving, walking, and riding a bike in Sacramento and the surrounding area. I'm sure you people are all seeing the people running red lights and taking really big risks doing this. And to be honest, I am quite fed up with it. I am speaking because I fully support the regional specific targets instead of aligning with broad statewide targets for SACOG. And we need to take a bolder approach because I'm looking at the graph here and you can try to explain away that right curve, but we need to do something about that. And SACOG needs to be bold and not just, kind of go along with the flow of what's happening. And you guys have a really important responsibility because you are over 6 counties and work with 6 counties. I mean, that's huge.
30 seconds.
So I just want you guys to be aware of this. And I'm not homeless. I'm an average taxpayer. And I'm really tired of this upward curve to the right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any other public comments? Do we have any written?
We do
public
have
comments?
written public comment. I can read those into the record now if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. The first is from Walt Seifert. He says, no one should have to risk their life to get someplace. We know how to make the transportation system safer, reduce vehicle speeds, have more trips made by foot or bike to make all road users safer. The goal for the region and the state should not be merely to reduce traffic fatalities and serious injuries, but to eliminate them. It is a somewhat ponderous safety targets and need assessment really required. The committee should act to save lives now, adopt a Vision Zero goal, communicate that goal to all SACOG jurisdictions, ask jurisdictions to implement the safe system approach. It is morally indefensible to have a fatality target other than 0. The safe systems approach was established by national experts and its needs and practices are already clearly defined. When lives are at stake, as they are today and every day, moving forward with alacrity and determination is not just desirable, but necessary. The next comment comes from Sarah Hutchell.
Can you, maybe if they're the same, can you provide the name and say that they're supportive of Vision Zero or supportive of
Yes.
Regional approach?
Will do.
Thank
Sarah Hutchell, a Sacramento citizen, she makes 3 bulleted points that statewide targets are too broad. Vulnerable road users need immediate attention and cross-jurisdictional collaboration is key. And then from Garrett Jensen, Sacramento citizen, he notes the same bulleted points as the previous commenter and says that the city of Sacramento is in the process of declaring a state of emergency with regard to road safety for drivers, walkers, bikers, and rollers. And he requests that SACOG has a duty to act with urgency. And then the last written comment that we have is from, Julie Berry. who also says that the safety targets are inadequate for our region. She's a pedestrian, cyclist, transit user. And that SACOG has a responsibility and opportunity to lead, and she requests region-specific targets. And that concludes the written comments.
Yeah, on behalf of the committee, I think we appreciate all the written and the verbal comments today, so thank you very much. Mr. Corliss.
Well, just, I know you're wrapping. I would just say, yeah, and maybe Sam has a take on this too, but I don't think we know what's happening in those spikes, right? So we can sit here and wonder why. I certainly, it does concern us greatly that those are spikes relative to the rest of the state. So this is our region versus everywhere else in the state of California. And just to connect the dots, when we went out and did all of our blueprint outreach, and we're coming to all of your jurisdictions and given the update on the blueprint plan, safety, unsafe streets, perception of like, this is not safe to either walk or drive, it was very high off the chart. So we do have an issue here. We got to get our arms around. Anyway, good discussion. Thank you.
We have a fatality increase during the pandemic in Sacramento. That's a remarkable thing. It's either data error or that could be a clue to some other behavior.
Right. Well, unless there's anything else to come before this committee, I'll move to adjourn to our next meeting.